Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name is Ross Bunker. I am a principal software engineer at Tableau, and I'm here to introduce our speaker today, Robert Rouse. Robert is a consultant for Interworks and a Tableau Zen master. Now, in preparing for this introduction, I also learned that Robert is a proud graduate of the US Air Force Academy. And I have to confess that when I learned this, I was completely and totally unsurprised. You see, when I was in high school, I spent a week at the Air Force Academy in the summer at a summer program. And the cadets there served as our counselors. And to this day, I remember them as some of the most remarkable individuals I've ever met. And so knowing Robert and his dedication to the community and the depth and breadth of his passion, I was really not surprised at all to know that he was, in part, a product of that environment. Robert has several blogs. He has a personal blog at viz.bible where he looks at the text of the Bible through lots of visualizations, as well as a blog at Interworks where he talks a lot about tips and tricks and how-tos and shares a lot of sage advice. Both blogs really reflect his passion for data and his willingness to share with the community. One of my favorite blogs that he did about a year ago on Interworks was called What I Learned About Mastering a Craft. And in this blog, there were two things that really stood out to me. The first is the emphasis that mastery is a journey. It's not a destination. He talked about how self-improvement and continuous learning are an important part of life. And I think that's particularly meaningful here at the Tableau conference, where we're surrounded by so many opportunities to learn from breakout sessions, classrooms, and from one another. The other thing that struck me about it was that Tableau, he's not just a Tableau user. Robert is a data analyst who is curious and passionate about finding answers and sharing those answers through stories. For me, Robert is really inspirational because Tableau is not just a tool. It is a tool, but it's a means to an end. And that end of sharing data and telling stories and getting meaning from data is really what inspires me to work at Tableau and to come to work every day. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Robert Rouse.
Thanks, Ross. Oh, he mentioned my experience at the Air Force Academy, and one of the first things that people ask me when they find out about that is, what was it like? What was it like as a cadet? So I thought I'd share a little story to give you some flavor for that. We have a lot of funny little sayings, and one of them was something that we used to remind people to pull up their socks all the time, which is high socks equals high level of motivation. So you're actually in for a treat, because today I have a chart that proves exactly that right here on my socks. So if you've got yourself a pair, sport and proud. He also mentioned that I'm a Tableau Zen master. And part of what that means is that I'm somebody who gets really excited and really passionate about telling people all the great things that they can do once they have Tableau software. I'm also a consultant, which means I work with a lot of companies. And I find that there are still many people who, even after they've had Tableau for a long time, are missing out on a lot of the really best things about Tableau. They're missing out on the value that they could be getting with such a powerful tool in their hands. So that's what I want to talk to you about today, is what is that value? Where does it come from? Why did you invest in Tableau in the first place? So to illustrate what I think is the core value here, I'd like to start with an anecdote that I borrowed from a guy named Jay Acunzo. He's a popular speaker in the content marketing world. And he gives this example. Imagine that you own a mattress store, and you see it as your job to sell people mattresses or pillows, because when customers come in, that's what they're wanting to buy, right? I want to buy a mattress, I want to buy a pillow. But he says, no, when they come in the mattress store, they're not looking for a better pillow. They're looking for a better night's sleep, because that's the value that that pillow provides to them. So think about your job. How many people in here would say that a big part of your job, or maybe all of your job, is to build dashboards? Show of hands, who builds dashboards in here? I want you to think about that today a little bit differently. Think that your job is not to build dashboards. Your job is to produce and communicate insights for people. Because when somebody comes to you and says, build me a dashboard, what they're really after isn't a dashboard. They're after what that dashboard can give them. Just like a pillow can give somebody a better night's sleep, a dashboard can give people some insight about their data that they might not have had before. So I want you to think about your job differently, and this is more than just a semantic difference. This is more than just saying the same kind of thing a different way. I think it reflects the way that we think about our jobs, our roles, as data analysts, as dashboard designers. And I think that this distinction actually gets to the heart of the difference between whether you think of yourself as an assembly line worker in a report factory versus being someone who is a highly skilled, highly sought after data analyst. So I'd like to share with you a little bit of my journey to getting to the point where I am as a data consultant. Making my first million rows, I was back working as an engineer, doing a lot of capital project planning, budgeting kinds of things, tracking a lot of data and financial projections month to month. I was using Microsoft Access to take every month's projections, load it into a database, compare one month to the other, and over time, eventually, I had 1 million rows of data. And boy, wow, that was big data for me. Because, I mean, I had something that wouldn't even fit in Microsoft Excel. From then on, I kind of started keeping track in my head of sort of a running total of whenever I would beat my last row count record. So, you know, we get up to the first million. Over time, we actually have so much data it won't even fit in Microsoft Access anymore. And wow, what do I do now? A few years later, I was working with Tableau data extracts. As soon as those came out, I had a database with 100 million rows, and I just couldn't wait to analyze it and break my record. We were tracking hourly data from machine sensors to compare actual emissions versus compliance standards. Fast forward to last year, now churning through 1.3 billion rows of New York City taxi data and having a lot of fun with it at IronViz and all the prep for that here last year. But one thing that I've learned, whether you have data that fits in Microsoft Excel or is getting too big for Access, or you've now got billions of rows and are working with huge new technologies, the Hadoops, the Exasols, the Snowflakes, all these great things that you see in the Expo Hall, the process of analysis, the kinds of questions that you need to ask, your thought process and approach to the data stays pretty much the same, even as the volume increases. Yeah, your tools are going to change, the technology, some of those techniques for managing that changes, but your mindset really doesn't. And that's what I want to share with you is some of the things that I think through. What is that process? What is that mindset? So we already talked about what is the real value of Tableau, right? The value is not that it can build dashboards. Absolutely it does that, and it does a fantastic job of that. But that's not what people are after. They're after the insight. But I also want to talk about the value of each and every data point. Also, when it's a good time to think about investing in something more than just visual analytics. How to ask more questions and get better at asking questions of that data. And how to encourage friendly debate so that you know that you can trust the answers that you're arriving at. So if we think about billionaire investors, they're the kind of people that never forget the value of a dollar. And so as we get to be data billionaires working with more and more rows, we can never forget the value of each and every record that we're capturing in that database. Think about it this way. oftentimes we produce these abstractions of the data that remove us somewhat from the real things that we're measuring. What are abstractions? Well, they're the calculations, they're your metrics, they're categories and regions, geographic areas, things that take a lot of data and make it grouped in such a way that we can understand it a little bit more. It simplifies it. And that's a good thing. We need to do that. But there's a danger in that, and the danger is that it can remove us in our minds of what is it we're actually measuring. So if we say that revenue was down last quarter, what's really happening, what's really behind that, let's say you were down in last quarter in the East region. Well, what's happening is customers in the East region are buying fewer things from your salespeople. So just putting it a different way when you think through this helps you to remember that what we care about is not so much the East region, it's the people that we're interacting with in that region. The people that are driving every one of those data points that we're capturing in the database. Now, there are ways to get farther and farther removed from that in the ways that we choose to visualize that. So here's New York City taxi data, which was that 1.3 billion rows that I was working with around this time last year. There are different ways that we can look at the activity throughout different parts of New York. One is that we can just put a bar chart and some categories for boroughs. Another way is that we can plot every single data point on a map for every drop-off. And we can kind of see some patterns, but that's a little too much. Too much data does make things hard to understand, so we can't necessarily visualize every single record. We just can't forget the value of that record that's behind it. So we have to weigh the fact that too much detail isn't a great thing, but too much abstraction of that detail is also not a good thing. I think Curtis Harris, when he was in the Iron Viz competition with me last year, the reason that he won is that he brought us back to the fact that the things that this data is dealing with is cab drivers and their passengers and how that affects people's lives. It's about the people behind that data, the ones that are generating every single data point. It's not about the neighborhoods. It's not about the activities and geography. It's about those people. And we need to remember that when we're building all of our corporate dashboards and things for your organization. Now, we saw in that example of where there's too much data, overplotting, too many points on a map, you get to a point where your visual processing capability just gets overloaded. And there are some things that you can do, best practices-wise, for data visualization. But even if you're a hardcore fan of guys like Stephen Few, Edward Tufte, and you do everything perfectly, you follow all the best practices recommendations, and make the best visualization possible, there are still questions that no matter how you do it, visualization isn't enough. So when is it time to invest in something more? Maybe invest your time in learning the algorithms in the analytics tab of Tableau, or investing in third-party tools like you might meet here at the Tableau conference. I'd like to give you an example from way back in 1936 that is an example that is actually very relevant to the machine learning community today. They use this as a training set for machine learning tutorials. So Ronald Fisher documented 4 measurements of different species of irises. There are 3 species of iris in these charts here. So it's 4 quadrants that measure petal width, petal length, sepal width, and sepal length. And so your challenge here is to look at just these 4 charts and see if you can find and classify 3 species of iris just with this chart. And I would challenge anyone to come up with any kind of a chart that would allow you to do that using visual analytics alone. Now, let's apply an algorithm. This one happens to be baked into Tableau. Not every algorithm is that way. But if we use something called k-means clustering, we see that the colors matched up on the left-hand side, where an algorithm guessed how these things might be grouped together and tried to classify these species, matches up very, very closely with what Ronald Fisher actually documented as those species of iris. Why is this relevant to the people in this room? Because I don't know about you, but I'm not a florist and I'm not interested in using machine learning to classify flowers. But you do have customers, you do have products, and you need to find the similarities of different kinds of customers, different kinds of products, customer segmentation, product segmentation, all of those kinds of things. What is behaving in similar ways? Those are questions that if you find yourself asking, which I think you should find yourself asking if you're really maturing in your data analytics, those are things where you need to start investing in something more than just a visual analytics tool. Let's talk about some of the other kinds of questions that you might run up against and ways that I think we can train ourselves to ask better questions or in a better way to get more value out of the data that you're collecting. Now, I'd like to show an example of a very basic chart. I wouldn't even really call this a dashboard. It's a table of numbers that gives you some information about some KPIs. The chart on the left isn't really what I want to call your attention to, though. I want to call your attention to the fact that we have some filters on the right. Now, when this starts out, maybe you've built a dashboard and all that you really care about is to be able to filter by category and a couple of geographic areas in ship mode. But over time, the people that are using this dashboard have more questions, and they say, well, you know, I'd really like to filter it by customer name instead. Can you add that filter for me? Okay, sure. Well, I also want to filter by customer segment. Can we go ahead and do that? Because I need to know some things by customer segment. All right, I'll add that filter for you, no problem. Well, time goes on, and now we need to see it by region, and now we need to see it by year. Now we need to see it by ship status, and oh, can we do it by order date instead? And on and on and on it goes until finally you have something that is not quite usable. There are far too many options. It's far too difficult to navigate through each one of those options, to compare them against each other. And now what you have is something that just isn't effectively answering the questions that people are coming to you to try to answer. So I challenge you that when people come to you asking for a dashboard, remember, your job isn't to just build the dashboard. When people come to you asking for yet another way to slice the data, stop and think, are they really looking for just another quick filter? Or is there another way that I can help them achieve what they're really after, which is to know something about that segment and be able to navigate it quickly and easily? This doesn't support that because they might be waiting on somebody else, you, who has a backlog, in order to get that answer. It limits the possible questions that you can ask of this data, and it only allows you to see one set of things at a time. So in order to change this, it's not that easy, I'll tell you that, because it means changing a culture at your organization. It means fostering a culture of analytics. I love what they said in the keynote yesterday morning and this morning about data governance and how that doesn't mean no data for you. It means opening it up, but opening it up in such a way that people can really get what they're after and trust the data across the board. So how does that work? Well, that could be a whole other hour-long session or 2 or 3 or 5. So I'll just point you to a few things that I found helpful. Take some notes on these things. Go out and do some research for yourself after the conference or find some recorded sessions on these. One is the Tableau Drive methodology. I think that's a really great way to outline what it looks like to build a culture of analytics within an organization. Enabling analysts with shared pre-structured data sources. Actually let people connect to those governed data sources on Tableau server, because let me tell you what can happen. I'll tell you this from my own experience. I was the first one using Tableau 7 years ago for the company I was at, the only one. And every time that I called somebody up to say, can I have this data? It would really help me answer a business question. No, only IT can touch that data. No, you cannot connect to our data warehouse. No, we cannot provide that to you unless you pay $30,000 for an IT project to structure it for you. I just want to connect the two tables and join it together, guys. So what happened instead? Because I didn't have access to the central location of the truth of the data, I just got it in Excel. I pulled what I needed and did it on my own. So be careful that the Wild Wild West looks more like the fact that people are just going to do their own thing and not tell you about it. If you actually open up the data, people will use your data. And I don't know if anyone here is in IT. I say your data. Maybe you're the person actually trying to bang down IT's door. I don't know. Also, I have really started to appreciate the value of fast databases. I want more data, and I want it faster. I really do. SQL Server, Oracle are great transactional systems. For reporting and analytics, virtually always, I have to pull a Tableau extract because the data's just not fast enough. But with newer modern databases, I have personal experience with Exasol and Snowflake. I love them. I think they're great. It means that everybody is getting data from the source, from a fast database, and don't have to make a copy elsewhere to optimize it for a particular report, a particular dashboard. And I'm really excited about Hyper and where that's going to go for Tableau in the future. Everybody needs a faster database. But I'd also like to say there's something that everybody in an organization can do, which is to encourage creativity when you're discussing data, to encourage an attitude of questioning what you see on the screen, and encourage some friendly debate. Here's a quote from a data scientist at Microsoft. Not exactly the kind of place that you might think of to go to for a quote on creativity. But he says, creativity allows us to take the data that we have, question our starting assumptions about what the data is telling us, and experiment until we make something useful out of it. Creativity and fostering that kind of thing helps us to think of questions and think about the data in a way that maybe we haven't thought of before. So think of a few examples of asking similar questions, but changing it just slightly enough, you can potentially end up with some very different conclusions. So instead of asking just, how have we been doing lately? How's revenue been doing lately in certain categories? Instead of asking that, ask yourself, how can we do better? Instead of asking, what was our change year over year comparing this month to the same month a year ago? Let's ask ourselves, how does this compare to normal? And this example gets back to what I was saying before about over-aggregating or oversimplifying, right? When we do year over year stuff, we're limiting ourselves to only 2 data points. Why would we do that? And what if last year was really not so good? Is that really your benchmark? Or would you rather compare against normal? Instead of asking what are the top or bottom 10 or 20 categories, see if you can find out what's driving those categories to be in the top or bottom. Instead of trying to prevent problems from the past by saying, okay, well, this thing happened, a piece of equipment went down because we didn't monitor some aspect of performance. So we need a dashboard to help us monitor that aspect of performance. Great, definitely prevent those problems from ever occurring again, but don't stop there. Think about what problems are we likely to face next? So I'd like to walk through another example of how just one change in the question that you're asking can significantly impact the conclusions that you might draw. By the way, if you're on Tableau Public, check out my profile and look at the Surprises in Superstore comic. This whole thing is actually in comic book form. So So if we ask the question, what is our net profit breakdown? Well, we can see it by product subcategory, and we can see that tables in the East is not doing so well profit-wise. And if you're a longtime veteran of Tableau conferences, this should be absolutely no surprise to you. There are even t-shirts with this on it. But instead of asking that question, what if we asked, where are we losing money? And instead we break it down by those categories that have made money and lost money. Because remember, these are abstractions. These are categories. Within each of these categories, some products are making money, some products are losing money, and when we aggregate it, we see the net of those two. What this view highlights is that office machines in the West actually have a lot of products that are losing a lot more money than those tables in the East. What are those products? Why are we still carrying fax machines? Why are we still carrying dot matrix printers and trying to sell them for $300? That's in this data set, by the way. That simple question can help you revise what products are on the shelf and help stop the bleeding in that category. So I'd also like to talk about a culture of debate. I mentioned I was an engineer, and there was a joke that I heard over and over and over, which is that arguing with an engineer is a bit like mud wrestling with a pig. After a few hours, you realize he enjoys it. And that's actually kind of true. The people that I was working with really loved to debate each other's conclusions. But it was a friendly debate. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't a heated conversation. It wasn't combative and let's go at it and I can't work with this jerk anymore. It was actually kind of fun, if you can believe that. Similar kind of thing that I've heard take place on a podcast I've started recently. It's called We Study Billionaires, the Investors Podcast. Every quarter they have something called the Masterminds discussion, where they get people on to discuss and debate their particular stock picks. Now, I'll tell you that one of the things that's the biggest barrier for the reason why people don't really like to debate about data is because it's tied to an incentive. I don't want you to challenge my conclusion about this because that might mean I lose some amount of commission, I lose some amount of my bonus. That's livelihood, that's my income. Well, investors are the same way. Their stock picks are their income. But you can listen to people on this podcast talk about their ideas and actually invite other people to tell me, why am I wrong? Why am I actually not going to make money off of this decision? And they're grateful for it. I want to see that happen in more organizations, that kind of friendly debate culture. And I think everyone in this room can start to encourage that by saying, here's my dashboard, why am I wrong? Tell me why I'm wrong. And then when they do, try not to get mad about it. That goes a long, long way, and it's not something that really has to come from the highest executives. It can come from anyone. So I'd like to leave you with one final thought about getting the most value, about what is your most valuable asset, right? You've got Tableau, you've got databases, you might have some ETL tools, you might have some really slick, cool data science stuff going on. Which one of those is your most valuable asset? Which one of those is going to help you maximize your investment in all this data? Well, you. You are the most valuable asset in the analytics world. Your ability to ask the right questions, your ability to think about what are people really after when they're asking for this dashboard? What do they really want to know? And how can I help them arrive at that answer more clearly and faster? So I'd love to talk with you all more about this. You can find me at the Interworks booth, different points of the conference. Later this afternoon, I will be hanging out in the Zen Master area of the community in the Data Village. It's right over by the Tableau store. You can also find me on Twitter at BibleViz. And if you like the session, please fill out the survey. If anyone wants to stay around for questions, I think we have a good bit of time left, so I'll stay up here and hang out and chat with anybody who's interested in talking more.
Are we asking questions this way, or did he say? Hi, I have a question.
Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. So in that example, so if you have like 1 billion records and
Yeah.
you're aggregating the data, so that product chart that you had, and then now you want to drill down, you want to drill into one of those products and bring back all the transactions for
Yep.
it. So how does that work in terms of like how are you connecting to 1 billion records?
Need a fast database. You really do.
Okay.
I mean, if you want to be able to drill into that kind of transactional level detail, to really dig and dig and dig and dig, that's what it's going to take, is a database that can handle that kind of request.
So would that be like an extract, or would that be a live connection with that database?
At that data volume, currently, I don't think Tableau data extracts are the best thing to do. Now with Hyper, that can probably handle it once that comes around. I can only speak to the databases I've personally worked with that work well at that scale, which is Exasol and Snowflake. I know that there are other solutions out there that other people can talk to. I've never seen anybody do that much data with SQL Server, at least not real-time analytics like you're talking about.
So in your example, you used a live connection?
Yes, to Exasol.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
For the taxi data, yeah.
So I had a question right along those same lines. Do you know how Hyper will compare to Exasol? I mean, there's obviously some similarities.
Beta just came out last week, so I haven't had a chance to do any detailed comparisons. I mean, the benchmarking things that I've seen, speed-wise, I think it's probably comparable. I know that in the first versions of it, it's really going to look and work exactly like you're used to with Tableau data extracts. So it's not going to have the capabilities that a database like Exasol will, where you can connect third-party tools or do inserts and update commands, things like that. Maybe it's going there in the future. I don't know.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, everybody.
Oh, we got some more in the back.
So you mentioned that one of the challenges you have is that not everyone is an analyst oriented towards just looking at data and solving problems, or even being able to ask the right questions. So different people have different mindset, different approaches.
Yeah.
So what are some of the strategies that you've been successful with in really fostering that analytic capability in them?
You have to provoke the imagination. It's very hard for someone to just dream up in their head a different culture, a different world, a different way of doing things. And you can try your best to just describe it in words, but again, there's no construct in people's imagination if they've never seen it. So you just have to show them. You have to have practical examples like, look, asking different questions can actually lead to something really important that you need to know. And here's the example. Here's this important thing that I found by taking the question that you asked me and just flipping it just a little bit. You really have to think broader than that person that's coming to you asking, I want to buy a pillow. It's like, you've got to probe and say, no, what are you really after? What do you really need? And show, you just have to show them the things that they can't imagine because they've never seen it.
Thank you for your talk. I work in steel processing, and a lot of our lines have hundreds of variables that could come off them. And I think any model that has that many variables is probably overfit. But I think half a dozen, 10 relevant variables to a given model is realistic. But as you're trying to communicate, with people who work on the shop floor in manufacturing, hey, this is what my model's telling you. Tableau is going to be 2 to 3 dimensional. It sits on a computer screen.
Yep. How
do you communicate the interactions of as you get into higher dimensions, even if it's 5 or 10?
Oh, that's kind of a specific problem. I'd want to spend more time thinking through it, but what comes to my mind immediately is not so much trying to display it all at once. So I think about an example where there's a viz that I did that turned out to be more popular than I thought it would be about a political survey that Pew Research did to rank people in their ideological score. And they used 10 different dimensions, 10 different questions to arrive at that score. Sort of, you can think of it like a prediction of how conservative or liberal is this respondent. And so to communicate how that model or how that scoring process worked, there was a dashboard that actually invited you to pick your answers in each of those 10 dimensions to see where you would fall. So if you give people a chance to sort of play with those variables and see how the model changes, then they understand, that's what's going on, and they understand these 2 or 3 things are the most important variables, and that's really the insight that they have to come away with. It's not so much a lot of the technical details of how your model works, but just look, this one parameter can change your result by 50%. That's what you show visually.
Specifically, I would point to R and Python as approaches that are going to get you a lot further than out of the box.
Yeah, what you just described, I would not attempt in Tableau. That's when it's time to invest in something beyond visual tools. Oh, absolutely.
It helps to communicate them so that the math is not offline, but we try to put the results that make it easier to do it. But your point is well taken on the interactivity and allow them to play with the model in essence in a user-friendly manner.
We have kind of that thing that you're describing set up as a demo where you put in your flight information and it churns through all those variables in a model and shows people the results. So if you want to come by, I can show you how we've done something like that to help people understand the results of a model. And maybe find that interesting. Yeah. Again, I'll be in the Zen Master area of the community shortly after lunch today. And if I'm not there, stop by the Interworks booth. Love to chat some more. Thanks, Joe.